Welcome back, everybody. I'm Sean LaFlock. I'm here with Scotty Hagnes. This is Conversations, Fitness, Wellness, and Longevity. Scotty, how goes it?
Hey, it goes great. How are you?
Not bad at all. Scott, you just got back from a little riding trip, eh?
Yep, my annual mountain bike trip. Did it a month or two early this year just to kind of get it out of it. Not to get it out of the way, but just I've got a lot of things going on. I needed to be training to do, and thought we'd do it now, and it was great, other than a lot of insects at the camp. But basically, we drove up to a ski area in the Elkhorn Range, and then we did some rides out of there, there's a small campground there. And, I did a short ride, about an hour and 45 minutes the first night, kind of went out solo. My buddy was a little tired, wanted to rest. So about 1,800 feet of overall climbing between the down and then up a single track. Hit this little alpine lake I'd never been to, and then back up. And then the next day was about 6 hours. So good single track climb, and then a big long 12-mile descent on a trail we've never been on. And then about 7 to 8 miles on the highway back to the ski area. So just continuous climbing, no flat whatsoever for 7.5 miles. And it was a climb I had done all the way from the valley floor 2 years ago on a big 2-day ride. And I got up at a lower heart rate and a faster pace this year in spite of significantly less training.
What do you think that's attributed to, Scott?
Well, that's a good question. I've been working on breathing drills, and I did both days, 100% nasal breathing at all times, even the anaerobic climbs, which I don't know, my recovery was better too. Honestly, the morning after the second ride, the long ride, I wouldn't have even known I had done it. I wasn't sore, didn't feel fatigued, didn't feel tired. My HRV was significantly more parasympathetic than normal, so there was traces, but I honestly didn't feel it. I would have just assumed I was good to go to pretty much do anything. And even usually the day after, you're like, I don't really want to lift weights or do another ride or whatever, I just want to chill. And I was like, probably lift today, probably do another day of riding if I needed to. And so it was really, really pretty good. The other thing, maybe, there's something to be said for all those hours and hours and hours doing the skill stuff on the other bike.
Yeah.
Even though it's not pedaling, it certainly develops a large base. That was my concern, is that my legs would give out because they didn't have the specific local adaptations to doing a lot of pedaling. But possibly all the training in the prior years, they quickly ramped it up. In the 3 weeks or so I did do some training for it, and maybe coupled with better respiratory performance, it was better. But I don't really know for sure, but I'm happy with the results. So.
That's awesome. Scott, have you done a bunch of camping up there in that area as well?
I have. I sort of grew up spending some of my time back there every summer with my family. My father was a very avid bow hunter, and we would camp out for as much as over a month at a time back there during the season. And this was from when I was 2 years old until, I continued doing that until my father became too ill to go back there, which was 2006, I want to say. So 40-ish years of going back to this country camping, and then I continued camping there myself afterwards and switching it a little more to riding. Not that I wouldn't like to continue bow hunting and procuring some of my old food, but my own food, I should say. But it's just the amount of preparation to set up a more involved camp and, practice to be, good at shooting the bow and, and having off-road transportation to get to the sites. And it's just been more than I can squeeze into my plate. So that just hasn't happened.
And other than that area there, have you done any kind of camping in national parks or anything like that? I know you're not too far away from places like Montana and Idaho and Wyoming. Have you ever done anything out there?
No, you're right. There is so much. And there's a lot, near Mount Hood and the Cascades. It's even a lot closer than this place we go. Have not done a ton outside of that. I did have a friend about between 15 and 20 years ago that I backpacked a fair amount with. So I did camp in that way. We'd go on several-day backpacking trips in other places. But, not a huge amount of camping experience outside of this one area.
I guess it's kind of like me, wanting to visit other beaches. I'm like, why? I got a great beach right here. What's the difference?
Yeah.
If you're basically growing up and camping in one of the nicest places in America,
Yeah. I mean, this time we stayed in the periphery in a camping area, but where we always posted up with the family was just on the national forest land.
Mm-hmm.
Where there's no, it's you can camp there, but it's not an improved campsite.
Yep.
And I know many square miles of country like the back of my hand. From all the different little ravines and the old mining artifacts. There's a kind of rich with gold mining history there, and whether I've hiked, hunted, biked, motorcycle ridden. I've been all over that country. So I don't know.
It's home.
Well, it'd be cool to explore something else. It's like, it's home away from home.
Yeah, I have an itch to book a flight to like Banff in Alberta, the Montana border there, and just get off the plane, take an Uber, and just get dropped off, and just like go walk the woods for like 3 or 4 days.
It is beautiful there. I have been there in the winter time.
Oh wow, okay.
Or, well, late winter, early spring. Well,
Yep.
It's still very winter-like. I think it was 11 below zero most of the week we were there, which isn't that uncomfortable as you might think.
Oh yeah, no big deal, Scott. Just walk outside without your shirt on, you freeze your nipples off.
It's biting to breathe it in, but I would recommend. That's an amazing place if you were to do something like that.
Yeah. So I'm obviously trying to get as much intel as I can. I'm a very much a look before I leap type person, because like the last thing I want to do is like show up there and get eaten by a bear. I actually was like having like visions of that last night. I was like, oh, just this enormous bear chasing me up a tree and just ripping me out of it and just eating me alive.
Oh man. Yeah, there definitely are grizzlies in that area. That's one thing we don't have here. I mean, there's mountain lions and black bears, but no grizzlies.
Yeah, you got a big ass 800-pound grizzly bear.
Well, I know someone, and I think you might know them, or if not, I don't know if you remember Trevor Salmon. He was.
The name sounds familiar.
He was one of the OPT crew back in the day.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, he still, he bikes, hikes. I see him occasionally getting out into Banff and hiking around and doing stuff out there. So as someone with good knowledge of the area, he would be somebody to potentially hit up for intel on that.
That's a good point. I will I'm glad I brought that up then. Yeah, it's I as I become more in tune with my day-to-day life and exploring things that are connections to my purpose, connections to friends and family and that kind of stuff. I think one of the connections that I don't respect quite as much is a connection to nature. I go to the beach every once in a while, but there's a profound difference being immersed in the woods versus kind of being at the beach and kind of going in the ocean. I think that's something that I definitely, when I go to places where it's like that, I always feel much more at home and much more at peace and much more connected when that happens. And then the other connection, I think that I really want to continue to explore is a connection within myself. And I think that's kind of goes hand in hand with being in the woods, being disconnected from the phone and from work. Like, I don't think as much as I've gone away and done, staycations and workations and stuff like that, I don't think I've dedicated like a good amount of time to just unplugging for an extended amount of time. So I've been grinding for about 8 years now, and I really have never taken a vacation. Like, all right, I'm just going to go away for a week and not do anything. Like, it's always like I'm doing emails or I'm working on that vacation so that I can allow myself to, you know what I mean? There was always some other responsibility. So I really have never been somewhere where I just didn't have a responsibility and could just chill and relax. So I've been itching,
I would
itching a little
highly recommend. Yeah, that is something powerful, and it's one of the reasons why I've continued going back there. Even before I kind of started this mountain bike ride tradition, there was an interim I would go back there alone and just reflect, and I would just walk, to places I knew, or I would sit down by the stream and meditate. Things you just don't ever have a chance to do, and it isn't like this way everywhere. But back there's no cell service. You can't use your technology if you wanted to.
Yeah,
it's just physically not possible. And there's something very liberating of that, especially in measured doses where you can
simultaneously
really
frightening. You're like, But
Yeah.
what if I need to, and then you get there and you're like, I really don't need that stuff actually.
Yeah, I was surprised how quickly I was like, the first night, I'm just kind of like, sitting around like, oh, I want to check my phone. I want to see what's going on. And I was like, well, I'll read my actual book I brought.
Yeah.
And then by the second night, I was just, yeah,
I mean,
didn't really
I
think
mean,
about it that much.
I mean, some of those places where you go, like just being, looking at the sky alone is one of those things where you're like, that's worth the price of admission.
Oh, yeah. The
You know?
smells sometimes they're
Yeah.
different. The smell of like a dry pine forest or something, or
Mm,
the high sagebrush country, all that
yeah.
is a very magical experience. And
Yeah, man. I've definitely there's a part of me that feels anxious and like you know eh, about doing it, but I got to kind of make that leap and just give it a try. But I'm thinking
mm-hmm.
maybe late August, early September might be a good time, just because. No, well, there's never a good time, but just making the time to do it. Then I'll be back from the games in the second week in August, and then maybe like the end of the month or something like that, and just make sure everything's settled down, and then take like 4 or 5 days, just go out there and come back and unplug, and
Do it, yeah.
hopefully everything doesn't burn down on me.
Everything will be fine. Yep.
Yeah, I actually did that experiment with. I'm not nearly as much on Facebook anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of like told myself that I was, when I was on, I was like, I do this for business, or I just want to kind of, just make sure that I'm not missing something. And then I was like, you know what, I'm just going to kind of get off of it. So I took it off my phone, and then the only time I get on it is to go through our Jim's Facebook page, so to check messages and to respond to and post the
Oh, yeah.
content for that. But other than that, maybe checking birthdays to make sure, and then not even posting on birthday walls or whatever. I'll physically either call them or text them and give them a nice little message or something like that. Not the generic.
Yeah.
I think there's something to be said about that. But the funny thing is after about a week or two of just uh, subconsciously clicking on this, like I don't know why I would do it. It kind of goes away, and you're like, oh wow, I never really had to do that. I'm not missing out on anything. There's nothing there that I don't have already, and it allows me to some space to do some other things that I didn't have time to do.
Yeah. Exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
so it kind of goes back to that book I was reading. I think I have it right over here. It's by Johann Harari. I have the cover right here. Hold on. It's called Lost Connections, and I wrote a post about this earlier in the week a little bit. But
Mm-hmm.
it's a good read. It's a pretty easy read, and it's got some good stuff in there. A wide breadth of like topics in terms of connection. Each of the chapters is one of the ways that we've lost connection, connection to other people, connection to meaningful work. It goes on and on. Connection to meaningful values, and that kind of goes hand in hand with the whole social media thing. But when you start to look at that stuff, it's pretty objective of saying, like, you know what, if you're doing these things, you're kind of valuing these types of connections over your kind of primordial connections to nature, to others, to a higher power, to meaningful work, all that kind of stuff. And we can see that why some of the reasons we're personally in disarray and as a society in disarray, because of the impact these changes have, and the lightning fast, evolution of technology has left us these basically shaved apes with an inability to evolve at the same speed.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that that they recommend is obviously getting back to nature. And I was actually exploring some things because they talk about a study from Johns Hopkins where they used the psilocybin for clinically depressed and anxious people, and saw very good results for it. As they're starting to find more and more with the use of psychedelics is that they have a profound effect on the areas of the brain that are the safety centers, the ego centers, so to speak, where they kind of dumb those down a little bit and allow you to experience life in a more authentic way. That being said, you probably don't want to be doing psychedelics while you're driving on the highway or operating heavy machinery. but
Right.
in a controlled therapeutic environment, it potentially could break down some walls and barriers that your ego wouldn't allow you to through conventional therapy or conventional methods. So it's something that I'm exploring, and maybe I'll do a double whammy. I'll grab some mushrooms and go to Banff and just wander the woods for a few days, and maybe I'll never come back.
Gotcha. The giant purple rabbit will chase you down.
Yeah, I mean, you know what though? Here's the funny thing, and this is something that I've found is super beneficial with the amount of information that is out nowadays. Like when we were, I mean, when we were young, let's say, Scott, like what was the misconception or the popular conception about steroids when you were younger? And obviously, we
Oh,
are a little bit apart, but
right. Yeah, but I would imagine it was still similar because didn't see a lot of
yep,
change, in those between those eras. Um, obviously they're bad. Cheaters do it,
yeah,
or just dumb meatheads that, you know,
yeah,
have no concern for the future, just getting, super slow.
exactly,
Um,
yes. And then when
Rather than understanding that they can be used to, you know, for certain health issues, and if they're
yeah,
monitored and done in a certain way, it isn't necessarily.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
we also start to understand that most of the athletes that you've loved and adored for a very long time are probably doing some kind of performance enhancing drugs in some way, shape, or form. And
Mm,
I think the same thing is starting to happen in many different ways. But one of them, I think, is through the use of psychedelics. And there's more and more research that's being done. And that once that research is done, it's put out there for the public to see, and we don't have to have it filtered from your mom and dad or your teacher saying that if you take LSD, you're going to stare at the sun until your eyes melt, or if you take steroids, you're going to have roid rage and kill somebody. Again, like the more information that we get, I think the more clear decisions that we can make, and the more objective decisions we can make, and the more responsibility the individual can take upon their own destiny, and not have to do it in the closet and away from the eyes of judgment, but like actually be helped through processes like using steroids for like you said, therapeutic usages, or therapeutic usages for psychedelics as well. um, and I think they actually were trying to get psychedelics on the usage, therapeutic usage of psychedelics on the ballot in California, which is a huge step since the 1960s, I think, since like the Reagan era, not the Reagan, the Nixon era. They basically
uh,
banned all psychedelics.
yeah.
So to even get these studies going, and um, to even think about getting it on a therapeutic usage kind of deal would be a pretty amazing thing. But
Yeah.
pretty good segue to something that happened out in your area there, Scott. Did you happen to hear about some of the performance enhancing drugs? Well, I guess the positive tests for PEDs from the CrossFit Games this last week.
I know, with being out of on the grid, off the
That's
grid, I
right,
have
you were off the
not,
grid. I'll
and I have
I'll
not
let you in
had
on a
time
little
to catch
info
up
then.
on much. Yeah, leave me the intel here.
So one of the things that they did that I think they've changed from years prior, don't quote me on this, but they expanded the testing pool. So they started testing people that were in regionals that were outside the top 10. So I believe that they were just randomly pulling people and then just doing some tests. And then they obviously tested everybody in the top 10. And in the West region, after like a hugely dominant performance, Emily Abbott tested positive.
Ooh.
Um, and she sent all sorts of paperwork. She had her lawyer reach out to CrossFit for a hearing, and they gave them all this paperwork, and like, all right, we got everything we needed. You're out, 4 years banned. That's it. Goodbye. So
Wow.
there is very little leniency when it comes to this is a no nonsense deal. Once the hammer comes down, that's it for you. So Emily Abbott's out. So that they took the sixth place person. I think her name is Megan Root, and I call her Megan Groot because I remember that. But Megan Root, who actually has a twin sister in our region, she made it. So she was sixth place, and now she bumps up to fifth place, which is great. And I believe in Europe, two of the Russians popped, and they took two more athletes. And then one of the Russian that actually won is unable to get a visa, so he's not going to be able to go to the games. He tried to apply twice and was unable to get it. And then if you look at the full report, I believe a few teams had some athletes get banned, and that disqualified the entire team.
Oh wow! Yeah.
So Scott, are PEDs being used in the sport of CrossFit?
Well, it'd be pretty hard to believe that they weren't on some levels in some ways. Happens in every other sport, and that's a fairly big time established sport these days. So why would it be any different?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. They put out a video also talking about the drug testing policies and that kind of stuff. But I mean, this is the way I see it. The more money you spend on drug testing, the more people you're going to find. I think that's just what I believe.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one thing not everyone realizes is, drug testing it's like trying to hit a moving target.
Yep.
Right, because there are so many different substances that one could potentially take. Each one requires its own test for the most part.
Yep.
And that is hugely expensive to a test for a vast array. And then you have to assume that there's R&D being done, and people may well be using things you don't even know to test for yet.
Mm-hmm.
So a clean test doesn't necessarily mean that an athlete is clean. It's just that they're not using the things that were tested for.
Yep, you're absolutely right. And there was 14 athletes that received bans or sanctions. Most of them 4 years, and there was one that was 2-year ban because it was a stimulant and not a anabolic agent. So if you get some kind of anabolic agent or some kind of estrogen blocker or something like that, they're unleashing the hounds on you. Again, it's a sport like any other. If you have your head in the sand, you're thinking that this sport isn't like every other sport, and there's some kind of holier than thou or some kind of extra integrity within the sport, you're joking yourself. This is human nature. Some humans are going to allow the enormity of what's going on to get the best of them. I guarantee if you asked any of these people, do you regret taking steroids? I'd probably say that none of them would. None of them would have a regret. They're all doing it for a purpose. They're all trying to get to where they think they need to be as an athlete, as an individual, as a job and a profession and a career. And the stakes are super high, and you're going to see the same thing in other sports as well.
Yeah, and it's and essentially it becomes kind of a even people that maybe don't really want to do it, might have to end up doing it, right? Because if your competitors are all doing it, right, as we've seen in many, many, many real established sports, you have to be very genetically gifted. You have to have an incredible work ethic. You have to have a great coaching system in place, and you have to use the cutting edge drugs because all those things are needed to make the top. And let's say you have all those except the drug, protocol. I mean, if you've invested that much time and effort and you realize everyone else is doing it, you almost feel like you have to level the playing field if you want to be competitive, and otherwise you're going to be, one of the also-rans.
Yep. I mean,
it's tough.
It really is. And this is a problem with all sports is that, you can't catch everybody. Just because there's going to be people who are ahead of the curve and who do it in certain ways and may have, inside information based upon who they are.
That's possible too.
That does happen in sport. It's done. If the testing is performed and executed by human beings, it has the potential for bias. Unless we turn it over to robots, we're always going to have some kind of bias. Right, where a robot randomly just selects some people and tests them, and then that's it.
Yeah, well, I think we've heard stories in other sports of, like the big stars of the sport potentially getting popped, and the federation doesn't want that out because it's bad for the growth of the sport and it damages everything. And so they'd rather, if they can keep a lid on it somehow, let it go by, as opposed to
Yep.
kind of mar the sport and because the stars are the ones that probably generate the revenue and right.
Absolutely. The UFC is kind of in a, a bit of a middle of the road or middle ground going on now, or having a fork in the road because they had a history of not really, it used to be the Wild West where they really didn't test, or they would just test on the day of the fight. And, whatever happens, happens. But they turned their testing over to USADA. And again, there might be biases in USADA, but for the most part, I think that having an independent testing rather than someone within an organization is probably a lot more objective. But they have seen many athletes either get tested positive or fall off in terms of their performance, or unable to continue their performances for longer periods of time. I think the quality of the athlete has decreased over the time, like the build and like the size of some of these athletes have kind of decreased over time. But I think in a sport like that, where you're using your bones and your body to hurt other people, I think you've got to kind of really, really, really check that, because that's a liability for someone. If you're allowing somebody to basically augment their body in order for them to be more of a sledgehammer, I think that's a liability for the person who they're fighting. Like if you're a clean athlete and the person who you're fighting is on anabolics or some kind of supplements, a banned substance, and then they're going to punch you in the face, I think that's a moral and just legal.
Yeah.
There has to be ramifications there.
Really does, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, whether someone out deadlifts you or whatever, not a big deal. But if you're taking,
a shin to the face.
Shin to the face, exactly. Yeah, from
a guy who's been juiced to the gills for the last 8 months. It's not so fun.
Yeah.
And I had a conversation with someone the other day about this, but it's just a matter of time before. They're already kind of doing this, and it seems like it's got some pretty good efficacy. Is the stem cell stuff, and using stem cells to not only regenerate but recover tissues and enhance tissues. So that's a whole rabbit hole that we have to kind of go down, because like if you're looking at stem cell usage, is that just something that's if you have the money, go and do it. It's not a performance enhancing drug. It potentially could be your own stem cells. I think that they do. Even if they did, even if in the next 20 years they did that, okay, we're going to take your own stem cells and re-inject it into your body and you'll be able to recover. And if they can minimize the, if there's no ill side effects from it, like what stops people from doing it? And from it being legal or illegal, why make it illegal?
Yeah, and at some point then there becomes some issues, like let's say it's not performance enhancing, but it does accelerate your recovery.
Yeah.
If you ban that, then are we going to start saying that other things that have been done for recovery, is getting soft tissue work necessary? Is that an unfair advantage? Is cryotherapy or whatever, right? Somewhere there's got to be a line drawn, and it isn't really a cut and dry line.
Yeah, it never is, but we have to have these conversations, and we have to have them in an open and clear dialogue, so that when we're having these conversations, we're not dealing with emotion, we're not dealing with anecdotal evidence, we're dealing with the facts. And the problem is right now with all these anabolic agents is most of them are banned as is, and they're class 4 drugs or whatever it is. And, even having those kinds of things is illegal.
So potentially federal offense right there. So even with
exactly. So even all these people are like, oh wow, they get banned from CrossFit. Like potentially, they can get some heavy shit thrown down on them, especially if they're doing this outside the supervision of a doctor. And even if you are doing it within the supervision of a doctor, they're going to have to speak up. I mean, look what happened was, what was going on during the steroid era of baseball, and all these baseball players coming up and testifying in front of Congress and purging themselves, because they had to, that's their name. But I think it's a topic that's always going to be ebbing and flowing, and the more information we get, the more of a deep conversation we have. But we have to have these conversations, as uncomfortable as they might be.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So speaking of competition, you guys must be gearing up and getting just about ready here. Got
You're
a couple
right.
weeks.
You're right, Scotty. We are finishing up the last tough week here, and then probably when they announce the workouts, we'll run through those the following week. We leave Monday. Check-in is, I think, Monday, and then they have I think the first day of the games is Wednesday this year for the Masters. So they do Wednesday, then they do opening ceremonies on Thursday, and then Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I think that's what's going to happen. So it's
So
all
they'll be
muddled.
kind of running more simultaneous and not schedule like they had done.
Yeah, we will see though, and obviously, I think we'll probably break down the whole enchilada next week, there, Mr. Scott. If that's cool with you.
Yeah. We don't really have time.
Plus,
today,
we'll probably have more
into
information in terms of what the workouts might be as well.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Perfect. Well, I'm Sean LaFlock. You can get me at Sean@CrossFitDelrabeach.com.
I'm Scott Hagnes. You can get me at Scott@CrossFitPortland.com.
Scott, we'll catch up next week, brother.
Will do.
Ride
Take care.
well. Later.
Yes, later.